My name is Eden Taylor, and at 35 years old, I thought I had the perfect life with my husband Carlos. 7 years of marriage, a gorgeous home in Pacific Heights, and millions of dollars invested in his thriving tech company. That was until last Tuesday night when I overheard him speaking Spanish, with his business partner plotting to send me away while they emptied our accounts. What Carlos never knew about me, I speak fluent Spanish, and now his empire will never be the same. If you are watching this, please let me know where you are from and hit that like and subscribe button while I tell you how I took back what was mine. Before my world collapsed around me, I was living what many would call the American dream. I graduated from Harvard with an MBA and quickly established myself as a financial consultant for tech startups in Silicon Valley. My analytical mind and ability to see the potential in emerging technologies made me highly sought after in the industry. I was independent, successful, and completely fulfilled by my career trajectory. That all changed when I met Carlos Mendoza at a tech conference in San Francisco 8 years ago. I was there representing a client, and he was showcasing his startup TechVista, a small but promising software company specializing in artificial intelligence and data analytics. Our eyes met across the crowded exhibition hall, and there was an immediate connection that I had never experienced before. Carlos was 38 at the time, tall with dark eyes that seemed to look right through me. His charisma was undeniable. Born to Mexican immigrants, he had that perfect blend of ambition and charm that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. When he spoke about his vision for technology that could transform businesses, his passion was infectious. I found myself lingering at his booth long after my scheduled meeting time had passed. We exchanged business cards, and he called me the very next day. Our first date was at a small Spanish restaurant in the Mission District. I remember how he ordered for both of us in perfect Spanish, impressing me with his cultural knowledge and confidence. That night we talked until the restaurant closed, discussing everything from market trends to our favorite books. There was an intellectual compatibility between us that felt rare and precious. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips to wine country late nights discussing business strategies and countless moments where I felt like I had finally met someone who understood both my mind and my heart. After 6 months of dating, Carlos proposed during a sunset sail on San Francisco Bay. The ring was a family heirloom from his grandmother, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds. Our wedding was nothing short of spectacular. We chose a vineyard in Napa Valley with 300 guests, including prominent figures from Silicon Valley. I wore a custom Vera Wang gown, and Carlos looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo. When we exchanged vows, I truly believed we would be together forever, building our empire side by side. At that point, TechVista was still finding its footing in the competitive tech landscape. The company had innovative ideas but lacked the capital to scale properly. Carlos had been funding it largely through small investor rounds and his own savings. After lengthy discussions about our future, I made the decision to invest in his vision. I used $2 million from my family inheritance and personal savings to help TechVista expand. The money allowed Carlos to hire top talent, upgrade their infrastructure, and accelerate product development. It was a significant amount representing most of my personal wealth, but I believed in Carlos and his vision. The investment came with the understanding that I would have a stake in the company and a say in major decisions. With the influx of capital, we were able to purchase our dream home in Pacific Heights, a stunning 4,000-square-foot Victorian with panoramic views of the San Francisco Bay. The house cost us $3.5 million, but with TechVista growing, it seemed like a solid investment in our future. We spent months renovating it to perfection, creating a showcase home that we were proud to entertain in. Those early years were magical. We traveled extensively, spending 2 weeks in the Maldives for our first anniversary, exploring the Italian countryside the following year, and discovering the temples of Japan the year after that. Carlos was attentive and loving, surprising me with thoughtful gifts and planning elaborate date nights, even as the company demanded more of his time. I eventually left my consulting position to join TechVista as the chief financial officer. It made sense to combine our talents with Carlos handling the vision and product development, while I managed the financial aspects of the growing company. We were partners in every sense of the word, building something meaningful together. Our relationship was built on what I thought was mutual respect and trust. Carlos valued my opinion in both business and personal matters. He would consult me on major decisions and we worked through challenges together. When disagreements arose, we found compromises that satisfied us both. At least, that was how it seemed. Carlos was the kind of husband who showed his love through actions rather than words. He remembered small details about my preferences, supported my friendships and hobbies, and always made time for us despite his busy schedule. On our 5th anniversary, he surprised me with a weekend trip to New York, including tickets to the Broadway shows I had been wanting to see. Under our combined leadership, Tech Vista thrived. Within 5 years, the company valuation had skyrocketed to $50 million. We had offices in San Francisco, Boston, and Austin with a team of over 100 talented employees. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies who relied on our software for data analysis and business intelligence. The financial press began featuring Carlos as a rising star in tech, and investors were clamoring to get involved. When we hit the $50 million valuation milestone, we hosted a lavish party for our employees and investors. Standing beside Carlos as he gave a speech, thanking everyone for their contributions, I felt immense pride in what we had built together. He publicly acknowledged my role in the company growth, raising a toast to his brilliant wife, without whom none of it would have been possible. The crowd applauded, and I believed every word he said. Our home became a hub for networking events and dinner parties with potential investors and clients. I enjoyed playing hostess, using these gatherings to strengthen business relationships while showcasing our personal success. Carlos and I were seen as a power couple in the tech world, complementing each other perfectly with our different skill sets but unified vision. Life seemed perfect. I had a successful career, a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a future full of promise. Never once did I suspect that beneath the surface, cracks were forming in the foundation of everything we had built. The first signs of trouble appeared so subtly that I almost missed them. About 6 months ago, Carlos began altering his schedule in ways that seemed innocuous at first. Board meetings suddenly ran late. Client dinners stretched into the night. Weekend work sessions became more frequent. None of these changes were dramatic enough to raise serious concerns, but together they created a pattern that left me with less access to my husband than before. Carlos began having more closed-door meetings, often ending calls abruptly when I entered his home office. He installed a new passcode on his work laptop, something he had never done in all our years together. When I asked about these changes, he explained them away as increased security measures due to the sensitive nature of new contracts. Around this time, a new figure entered our lives. Miguel Fuentes, a 40-year-old entrepreneur from Colombia with connections throughout Latin America, began appearing regularly at Tech Vista events. Carlos introduced him as a potential partner who could help expand our business into South American markets. Miguel had a commanding presence, expensive tastes, and a network of business associates that impressed even our most seasoned investors. Carlos and Miguel quickly developed a close relationship. They spent long hours discussing strategy, often switching to Spanish when the conversation became detailed. Miguel began joining us for dinner at our home, bringing expensive bottles of wine and charming stories about his international business ventures. On the surface, he seemed like a valuable addition to our business circle. Along with Miguel came Gabriela Suarez, a striking 28-year-old marketing executive who Miguel introduced as his associate. She began attending company functions, always impeccably dressed and positioned near Carlos during important conversations. I noticed how her hand would linger on my husband's arm when they spoke, how she would laugh a little too enthusiastically at his jokes. The dynamic in our home began to shift. Carlos would take phone calls in private, speaking in hushed Spanish when I was nearby. Although I could often hear him from the next room, I never let on that I understood. You see, I had studied Spanish for 4 years in college and spent a year abroad in Barcelona on an exchange program. I was fluent, but Carlos and I had always communicated in English, and the topic of my language skills simply never came up in our relationship. Carlos explained that the company was exploring expansion opportunities in Latin America, which necessitated these private conversations in Spanish. The explanation seemed reasonable, especially given Miguel's involvement, but something about it left me uneasy. Why was I suddenly being excluded from these discussions when I had always been part of strategic planning? Gradually, I found myself removed from key meetings at Tech Vista. Carlos suggested that I focus on our current operations, while he and Miguel handled the expansion plans. This division of responsibilities made sense on paper, but it was a departure from our previous partnership approach. When I pressed for more involvement, Carlos assured me that he was just trying to spare me from the stress of launching in a new market. Carlos also began scrutinizing company expenses, more closely questioning purchases that he would have previously approved without hesitation. Our personal finances became a point of contention too. He suggested we delay renovating our kitchen, claiming that we should conserve cash for the business expansion. This from a man who had never blinked at spending on our home before. Small arguments erupted over financial decisions that would have previously been non-issues. When I wanted to hire a new financial analyst for my department, Carlos pushed back, saying the position could wait. When I questioned the need for frequent business trips to Miami and Mexico City, he became defensive, accusing me of not supporting the company growth. During this period, I discovered several text messages on Carlos' phone that raised red flags. They were from Gabriela, often sent late at night, discussing meeting times that weren't on any official company calendar. One message read, "Can't wait to finalize everything. It will be worth all the secrecy." When I casually mentioned having seen a text from Gabriela, Carlos quickly explained that she was helping with a surprise product launch and swiftly changed the subject. My growing unease was something I tried to rationalize away. Carlos was under pressure with the expansion. The secrecy was just business strategy. The late nights were necessary for the company growth. I told myself these things repeatedly, not wanting to acknowledge the alternative explanations that lurked at the edges of my consciousness. I shared some of my concerns with my best friend Lisa, careful not to sound paranoid or accusatory. Lisa had known us both since before we were married and had always been supportive of our relationship. Even she noticed the change in Carlos' behavior when we all had dinner together. "He seems distracted," she observed. And he checked his phone 17 times during appetizers alone. Lisa suggested I talk openly with Carlos about my concerns, but something held me back. Perhaps it was fear of what I might discover, or maybe it was hope that this was just a temporary phase that would pass without confrontation. Either way, I chose to watch and wait, gathering information while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. The changes in our personal relationship were equally troubling. Carlos and I had always been physically affectionate, but he began to pull away from my touch. Our intimate life became less frequent, with Carlos often claiming exhaustion from work. Morning coffees together, once a cherished ritual, were replaced by Carlos rushing out the door with travel mug in hand. Weekend brunches gave way to Carlos claiming he needed to go to the office. I began to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, unsure of my standing both personally and professionally. The woman who had once confidently managed million-dollar portfolios now doubted her own perceptions. Was I overreacting? Was this just the natural evolution of a business-focused marriage? Or was something more sinister unfolding right before my eyes? The night that changed everything started innocently enough. Carlos had arranged a dinner party at our home for Miguel and several potential investors from Mexico City. I spent the day preparing, ordering, catering from an upscale restaurant, and arranging fresh flower displays throughout the house. I wanted everything to be perfect, perhaps subconsciously hoping that a successful evening would restore some normalcy to our increasingly strained relationship. I wore a navy blue dress that Carlos had once complimented, styled my hair in loose waves, and applied makeup carefully. Part of me was still trying to recapture the connection we seemed to be losing, though another part was growing increasingly suspicious of his behavior. Guests began arriving at 7. Miguel was among the first, accompanied by Gabriela, who wore a fitted red dress that drew every eye in the room. She air-kissed my cheeks in greeting, her perfume lingering in the space between us. Eden, thank you for opening your beautiful home to us, she said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Throughout the evening, I played the role of perfect hostess, refilling wine glasses and facilitating conversations while carefully observing the dynamics around me. Carlos and Miguel frequently separated themselves from the main group, huddling in corners for hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when others approached. Gabriela remained close to Carlos, touching his arm when she laughed, leaning in unnecessarily close when speaking to him. I felt like an outsider in my own home, watching a performance where everyone knew their lines except me. The investors from Mexico City seemed impressed with whatever Carlos and Miguel were proposing, nodding enthusiastically during their presentations and exchanging knowing glances. By 11, most guests had departed, leaving only Miguel and Gabriela lingering over digestives in the living room. Carlos suggested I retire for the night, saying he needed to finalize some details with them regarding the Mexico City office. His tone was dismissive, making it clear my presence was not required or desired. Reluctantly, I went upstairs, but sleep eluded me as I listened to the murmur of voices below. Around midnight, I heard Miguel and Gabriela leave. I waited another 30 minutes before deciding to go downstairs for a glass of water, expecting Carlos had come up to bed. As I descended the stairs, I noticed light spilling from beneath the door of Carlos' home office. Quiet voices drifted into the hallway. Curious, I moved closer, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard near the office entrance. The door was slightly ajar, allowing me to hear clearly without being seen. Carlos and Miguel had not left after all. They were speaking rapidly in Spanish, their tones urgent and conspiratorial. I froze, straining to catch every word, my heart beginning to race as the content of their conversation became clear. "The accounts in Panama are ready," Miguel was saying. "Once the final contracts are signed, we can begin moving the assets through the shell companies. The paperwork shows Eden as signing off on everything." "And you are certain it cannot be traced back to us?" Carlos asked, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "The documentation is perfect. By the time anyone realizes what has happened, the money will be untouchable," Miguel assured him. "Your wife trusts you completely. She has no idea." My stomach dropped as I continued listening. They discussed specific amounts: $3 million from the operating account, $5 million from the investment fund, my personal stake in the company valued at $12 million, all of it scheduled to disappear into a complex web of offshore accounts. "So Eden will go to Paris on Tuesday, perfect. She will know nothing until it is too late," Miguel said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Carlos' response chilled me to the bone. "When she returns, everything will be finalized. I will file for divorce, and her shares will be worthless. The company valuation will have plummeted due to the unfortunate discovery of accounting irregularities. Such a shame that the CFO was so careless. They were planning to frame me for financial misconduct while stripping the company of its assets. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself." "And Gabriela, she understands her role?" Miguel asked. Carlos laughed softly. "She is more than ready to play the supportive girlfriend, helping me through the difficult divorce. The penthouse in Miami is already in her name." They continued discussing details: the timing of transactions, which board members were complicit, how they would handle potential legal challenges. Each word was another dagger to my heart. The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was systematically planning to destroy me. I stood frozen outside that door, unable to move as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over me. 7 years of marriage. $2 million of my own money invested. Countless hours of work building Tech Vista into a successful company. All of it about to be stolen by the person I trusted most in the world. The physical sensation was overwhelming. My chest constricted, making it difficult to breathe. My vision narrowed, darkness creeping in at the edges. I felt simultaneously hot and cold sweat beating on my forehead while chills ran down my spine. This was more than heartbreak. This was devastation. Somehow I managed to silently retreat upstairs before they could discover my presence. I slipped back into our bedroom, locking the door behind me. Only then did I allow the tears to come muffling my sobs with a pillow so Carlos would not hear when he eventually came to bed. My mind raced through the past 6 months, reinterpreting every unusual behavior, every secretive phone call, every unexplained absence. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Carlos had been planning this betrayal methodically, perhaps from the moment Miguel entered our lives. I thought about the money I had invested in Tech Vista, my family inheritance that represented generations of hard work, my personal savings from years as a financial consultant. I thought about our home purchased with the understanding that we were building a future together. I thought about the employees who depended on the company for their livelihoods, all of them unknowing pawns in this scheme. As the hours passed, my shock and pain began to transform into something else. A cold, clear anger took root, bringing with it a determination I had never felt before. Carlos had underestimated me. He saw only what he wanted to see, the trusting wife, the supportive partner. He had no idea what I was capable of when betrayed. By the time dawn broke, I had cried all the tears I would allow myself. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw, but my mind was razor sharp. Carlos had made a critical mistake in his perfect plan. He did not know that I understood every word of his Spanish conversation with Miguel. And that single oversight would be his undoing. I heard Carlos stirring in the guest room where he had apparently spent the night. Soon he would come to tell me about my Paris trip, playing the role of caring husband while secretly counting down the hours until he could execute his plan. I splashed cold water on my face, concealed the evidence of my sleepless night with makeup, and prepared to give the performance of my life. The game had changed. Carlos thought he was sending me away so he could destroy everything we had built. Instead, he was giving me exactly the opportunity I needed to save it all. Carlos entered our bedroom at 7:30, freshly showered and dressed in the charcoal suit I had given him for his birthday. His smile was warm and seemingly genuine as he sat on the edge of the bed beside me. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead. "I have exciting news. The Paris office needs someone senior to review their operations next week. I thought you might enjoy spending a few days there. The flight is booked for Tuesday morning." I widened my eyes and practiced surprise and delight. "Paris, that sounds wonderful. How long would I be there?" "About a week," he replied, scrolling through his phone calendar. "The company apartment is available, and you know how much you love the left bank in spring." I touched his arm affectionately, swallowing my revulsion. "That is so thoughtful of you to arrange. I will start packing today." Carlos appeared pleased with my response, completely unaware that I had heard every detail of his plan. "I have meetings all day, but we will celebrate with dinner tonight," he said, standing to leave. "Love you." "Love you too," I replied the words, turning to ash in my mouth. The moment the front door closed behind him, I sprang into action. First, I called Sophia Reynolds, my college roommate, and now a partner at one of San Francisco's most prestigious law firms, specializing in corporate law. "Sophia, I need your help." "It is an emergency," I said when she answered. "Can you meet me in person somewhere private as soon as possible?" Her response was immediate. "My office in 1 hour. Use the private elevator from the parking garage. Is everything okay?" "No, but it will be," I answered, already moving to get dressed. While preparing to leave, I did a quick sweep of our home office. Carlos was too careful to leave obvious evidence lying around, but I searched anyway, looking for anything that might support what I had overheard. In his desk drawer, I found a key I had never seen before. On a hunch, I tried it in the safe hidden behind the painting in his office, a safe I knew existed but had never accessed. Inside, I discovered a folder containing documents for a company called Meridian Holdings in Panama, along with papers bearing what appeared to be my forged signature authorizing transfers of Tech Vista intellectual property. I photographed everything careful to return the documents exactly as I had found them, then headed to meet Sophia. In her office, I laid out the entire situation, the gradual changes in Carlos' behavior, Miguel and Gabriela appearances in our lives, and most importantly, the conversation I had overheard. Sophia listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This is serious, Eden," she said when I finished. "They are planning what amounts to corporate theft on a massive scale, potentially securities fraud and definitely identity theft with those forged signatures. We need to move quickly but carefully." She immediately began outlining legal strategies, explaining what evidence we would need and which authorities should eventually be involved. As she spoke, I felt a sense of control returning. I was not helpless. I had resources, knowledge, and now a plan. My next call was to Vincent Parker Tech Vista, Chief Operating Officer, and someone I had personally hired 3 years earlier. Vincent had been my ally in the company from the beginning, and I trusted him implicitly. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop far from the office where we were unlikely to encounter other employees. Vincent was visibly shocked as I recounted what I had discovered. "I noticed Carlos had been excluding you from certain meetings," he admitted, "but I never imagined anything like this. Miguel always made me uncomfortable, but I assumed I was just being paranoid." Together, we accessed the company financial records through Vincent's laptop. Over the past 6 months, subtle irregularities had appeared: millions in consulting fees to companies we could not identify, unusually large expenditures classified as business development, and transfers to new subsidiaries with vague, operational descriptions. "These must be the shell companies they mentioned," Vincent said, pointing to a series of transactions to entities in Panama and the Cayman Islands. "If I had to guess, I would say they have already moved close to $4 million. Armed with this information, I returned to Sophia's office. We worked late into the night preparing documentation for an emergency board meeting and drafting legal motions to freeze company assets if necessary. Sophia also connected me with a forensic accountant who could track the money trail. "What about your personal accounts?" Sophia asked. "If Carlos has access, you need to secure those immediately." I spent the next morning opening new accounts at a different bank, transferring my personal funds, and removing Carlos' access to my remaining assets. I was thankful that I had maintained some financial independence throughout our marriage, with investment accounts in my name only. The next crucial step was gathering allies on the board of directors. Tech Vista had a 7-member board, including Carlos and myself. I would need at least 3 of the remaining 5 members to support me if I hoped to stop Carlos' plan. I began with Janet Wilson, a venture capitalist who had been one of our earliest investors and who had always been supportive of my role in the company. We met for lunch at her club, where I carefully presented the evidence I had gathered. "I always thought you two were the perfect couple," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "But these numbers do not lie." "Count me in your corner, Eden. What Carlos is planning would destroy not just you, but the company that so many people have worked to build." One by one, I met with board members, sharing just enough information to secure their support without tipping off Carlos. By Sunday evening, I had 4 of the 7 votes needed to remove Carlos as CEO if necessary. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator to track Carlos and Gabriela movements. Within 48 hours, he provided photographs of them entering and leaving an apartment in Pacific Heights. I had never known about confirming their affair, had progressed far beyond professional boundaries. The pain of this visual evidence was acute, but it strengthened my resolve. This was no longer just about saving the company or my financial stake. It was about justice, about not allowing Carlos to profit from his betrayal. Throughout these frantic days of preparation, I maintained a facade of normalcy at home. I packed for Paris, made dinner reservations at our favorite restaurants, and responded to Carlos' affection with convincing warmth. Each moment was an exercise in self-control, each smile a masterpiece of deception. The stress was enormous. I lost 5 pounds in 4 days, barely able to eat as I worked around the clock to counter Carlos' plan. Sleep came in short bursts, my mind constantly racing with details that needed attention. But beneath the exhaustion and anxiety was a growing sense of empowerment. I was fighting back, reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Monday night, our last evening before my supposed departure, Carlos took me to Gary Danko, the restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary. He ordered champagne toasting to our success and future together. He gave me a platinum bracelet, claiming it was a gift to remember him by while I was in Paris. I accepted it with appropriate gratitude, all while knowing that in his mind this was not a gesture of love but a final payoff, the last gift before the betrayal. The irony was almost unbearable. "I will miss you," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "It will be a busy week here, but I will be counting the days until you return." I smiled, squeezing his hand in return. I have a feeling this trip will change everything for us. Carlos nodded, interpreting my words as I intended, completely unaware of their true meaning. I believe you are right about that, he replied, raising his glass once more. That night, as we lay in bed together for what would be the final time, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the journey that had brought us here. How had the man I loved so deeply become capable of such calculated betrayal? Had he ever truly loved me, or had I simply been a convenient stepping stone in his ambitions? These questions had no satisfying answers. What mattered now was not the past, but the future that I would forge for myself from the ashes of this marriage. As Carlos drifted to sleep beside me, I silently vowed that tomorrow would be the beginning of that new future. The final pieces of my counter-strategy fell into place in the early morning hours. Vincent confirmed that the emergency board meeting was set for 2 o'clock the following afternoon, precisely when Carlos and Miguel planned to sign their final agreements. Sofia had prepared all necessary legal documents. The forensic accountant had traced the money trail and identified which accounts needed to be frozen. Everything was ready. The stage was set. All that remained was for Carlos to drive me to the airport, believing he was sending me away while he executed his plan. Instead, he was about to face the consequences of underestimating the woman he had married. Tuesday morning arrived with a sense of surreal calm. I finished packing my suitcase with clothes I would never wear in Paris, carefully selecting outfits appropriate for the board meeting later that day. Carlos watched from the doorway, occasionally checking his watch, barely concealing his impatience to get me to the airport and begin executing his plan. "Do you have your passport?" he asked, his concern for my travel preparations, a perfect mask for his true intentions. "Right here," I replied, patting my handbag while maintaining my own facade of excited traveler. "And all my travel documents are loaded on my phone." Carlos loaded my luggage into his Audi, chatting about Parisian cafes and suggesting neighborhoods I should explore during my free time. The performance was flawless, down to his reminders about the time difference for our calls. He had clearly rehearsed this moment, this sending off of a wife who would return to find her life in ruins. The drive to San Francisco International Airport was filled with mundane conversation. Carlos asked about my meetings in Paris, offering suggestions for presenting our financial models to the French team. I nodded and took notes, playing along with this elaborate charade even as my heart pounded with anticipation of what was to come. At the departures terminal, Carlos pulled to the curb and stepped out to retrieve my luggage. He embraced me tightly, kissing me with what appeared to be genuine affection. "Have a safe flight, my love. Call me when you land." "I will," I promised, returning his kiss. "Good luck with your meetings this week." A flash of something crossed his face at my words, perhaps a moment of guilt or hesitation, but it vanished quickly. He waited until I entered the terminal before driving away, undoubtedly already calling Miguel to confirm that phase 1 of their plan was complete. What Carlos did not know was that Sofia was waiting for me just inside. The moment he drove away, I turned and walked toward the airport parking garage rather than the security checkpoint. I had no intention of boarding any flight today. "He bought it completely," I told Sofia as we walked briskly to her car. "He thinks I am safely out of the way." "Perfect," she replied. Vincent just texted. Carlos returned directly to the office and is meeting with Miguel now. They have no idea what is coming. We drove to Sofia's office, where we had established a command center of sorts. The forensic accountant, 2 additional attorneys from Sofia's firm, and Vincent were waiting for us, surrounded by documents and laptops. "The board members are all confirmed for 2 o'clock, Vincent reported. "Carlos has scheduled his own meeting with the Mexican investors for 3, obviously planning to present them with a done deal after the company assets have been transferred." The timing was critical. We needed the board to vote before Carlos could complete his transactions, but not so early that he would be warned and able to accelerate his plan. Everything hinged on precise execution. While we waited, I reviewed the mountains of evidence we had gathered over the past 5 days. The forensic accountant had documented transfers totaling $4.7 million to the shell companies in Panama. The private investigator had provided photographs of Carlos and Gabriela, together entering the penthouse apartment purchased with company funds. Vincent had uncovered emails between Carlos and Miguel, discussing the plan dating back 14 months earlier than I had suspected. The most shocking discovery was that Carlos had been systematically undermining my position at the company for over a year, spreading subtle misinformation about my decisions to board members and key investors. He had been laying the groundwork to blame me for financial improprieties long before I had noticed any changes in his behavior. He planned this meticulously, the forensic accountant commented, pointing to a timeline of suspicious activities. If you had not overheard that conversation, he probably would have succeeded. The realization that Carlos' betrayal extended so far back was another blow to my already shattered heart. Our anniversary celebrations, birthday gifts, romantic getaways, all had occurred while he was actively plotting against me. The depth of his deception was almost incomprehensible. At 1:30, we gathered our materials and headed to the Tech Vista offices. Vincent had arranged for us to enter through a side entrance, avoiding the main reception area where we might be seen. We set up in the small conference room adjacent to the main boardroom, waiting for all board members to arrive before making our entrance. Through the wall, we could hear Carlos and Miguel arriving, greeting board members with casual confidence, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Their voices were animated as they discussed recent developments and market opportunities, no doubt setting the stage for the announcements they planned to make. At precisely 2 o'clock, Janet Wilson, our ally on the board, called the meeting to order. Carlos began his prepared remarks, outlining the tremendous growth opportunities awaiting Tech Vista in Latin American markets. He spoke of strategic partnerships, innovative technologies, and unprecedented return on investment. As he reached the portion of his presentation addressing the financial restructuring that would facilitate this expansion, Janet interrupted him. Before we continue, I believe we have some additional attendees who should join us for this discussion. That was our cue. Vincent opened the connecting door, and our group filed into the boardroom. The expression on Carlos' face as he saw me enter would be forever etched in my memory. A mixture of shock, confusion, and the first flickers of fear. "Eden," he stammered, recovering quickly. "What are you doing here? Your flight?" I smiled calmly, placing my portfolio on the table. "I decided this meeting was more important than Paris. Please continue with your presentation. I am particularly interested in the financial restructuring you were about to discuss." Miguel had gone pale, his eyes darting between Carlos and me, clearly trying to assess how much I knew and what threat I posed to their plan. Carlos attempted to regain control of the situation, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "Eden, this is a complex strategic discussion. We can catch you up later. Perhaps you should rest after your canceled flight." Janet Wilson intervened. "Actually, Carlos Eden has requested this emergency board meeting to address some serious concerns about company finances and leadership. As chairperson, I have granted that request." Carlos looked around the room, suddenly realizing that the situation was slipping from his grasp. "What is this about? If there are concerns, I should have been notified in advance." The way I was notified about the $3 million transferred to Meridian Holdings in Panama, I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Or the way I was informed about the plans to devalue my shares while I was supposedly in Paris. The color drained from Carlos' face. Miguel stood abruptly, gathering his papers. "This appears to be a personal matter between you two. Perhaps we should reschedule the business discussion." "Sit down, Mr. Fuentes," Sofia commanded her lawyer persona in full force. "Your involvement in this matter is well documented, and attempting to leave now could be interpreted as consciousness of guilt." Miguel sank slowly back into his chair, exchanging a panicked glance with Carlos. The other board members looked confused and concerned, waiting for an explanation. I opened my portfolio and began distributing documents to each person at the table. "What you have before you is evidence of a systematic attempt to defraud Tech Vista of its assets, transfer intellectual property to shell companies, and leave the original company as an empty shell, all while laying the groundwork to blame these activities on me." For the next 45 minutes, I methodically presented our findings with the precision and clarity I had developed during my years as a financial consultant. The forensic accountant provided detailed analysis of the suspicious transactions. Vincent outlined the operational changes designed to exclude me from decision-making. Sophia explained the legal implications of the forged documents bearing my signature. As the presentation continued, Carlos attempted several times to interrupt, each excuse more desperate than the last. This is a misunderstanding. These were preliminary explorations only. The transactions were temporary measures for tax purposes, but the evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. When I played a recording of a phone call between Carlos and Miguel discussing how they would frame me for financial misconduct, his final defense crumbled. The private investigator had legally obtained this recording from a source within Miguel's organization, someone who had become concerned about the ethical implications of their activities. "I think we have heard enough," Janet said when the presentation concluded. As chairperson, I call for an immediate vote on the temporary removal of Carlos Mendoza as chief executive officer pending a full investigation of these allegations. The vote was unanimous, with Carlos abstaining and my vote not needed for the majority. Security personnel were called to escort Carlos and Miguel from the building, their access to company systems immediately revoked. As they were being let out, Carlos turned to me, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You set me up. You planned this all along." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Carlos. I simply learned from the best. You taught me everything I needed to know about betrayal." With Carlos and Miguel removed, the board turned to the immediate steps needed to stabilize the company. I was named interim CEO, with Vincent as COO, and expanded authority. Emergency measures were implemented to freeze suspicious accounts and secure company assets. A press statement was drafted to address any market concerns once the news became public. The meeting continued late into the evening as we developed strategies to mitigate damage and reassure employees, clients, and investors. Through it all, I maintained my professional composure, focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on the personal devastation I felt. It was nearly midnight when I finally returned home, our home, that now felt like a museum of lies and broken promises. I walked through the silent rooms, touching photographs from happier times, wondering if any of it had been real. In our bedroom, I began removing Carlos' things from the closets and drawers, packing them into boxes with mechanical efficiency. Each item carried memories now tainted by knowledge of his betrayal. The watch I had given him for his birthday, the sweater he wore on our trip to Napa, the collection of cufflinks I had added to each Christmas. As I worked, the emotional weight of the day finally caught up with me. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the physical remnants of our life together, and allowed myself to truly feel the loss, not just of the husband I thought I had, but of the future we had planned, the trust I had given so completely, and the love I had believed was real. But amid the grief was something else. A sense of fierce pride in what I had accomplished in just 5 days. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and responded not with helpless victimhood, but with strategic action. I had saved the company, protected our employees' livelihoods, and reclaimed my professional standing. Carlos had underestimated me in the most fundamental way. He had seen me as an accessory to his success, rather than a capable, intelligent woman in my own right. That miscalculation had been his downfall. As dawn broke over San Francisco, I showered and prepared for my first day as Tech Vista CEO. There would be challenges ahead, legal battles, rebuilding trust within the organization, establishing new leadership. But for the first time since overhearing that fateful conversation in Spanish, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Carlos had intended to send me to Paris so he could dismantle everything we had built. Instead, he had given me the opportunity to save it all and discover my own strength in the process. 1 week after the emergency board meeting, we scheduled a company-wide assembly to address the dramatic leadership changes at Tech Vista. Rumors had been swirling despite our best efforts to control the narrative. Employees were understandably concerned about their jobs, the stability of the company, and what these changes meant for their futures. The morning of the assembly, I arrived at the office early to prepare. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity securing company assets, meeting with key clients to reassure them working with law enforcement on the criminal aspects of Carlos and Miguel activities. I had barely slept, surviving on coffee and adrenaline while rebuilding what they had tried to destroy. Vincent met me in my office, now relocated to the executive suite, formerly occupied by Carlos. "The legal team just called," he reported. "Carlos is demanding a meeting. His lawyer claims he has documentation that will exonerate him. I had been expecting this. Carlos was not someone who would accept defeat easily. Tell them we will meet tomorrow at Sofia office, with all legal representatives present. Today is about reassuring our team." The company assembly was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the large conference center on the ground floor of our building. As employees began filing in, I could feel the tension and uncertainty in the room. These were people whose livelihoods depended on TechVista. People I had worked alongside for years, who had no part in the executive-level betrayal, but would suffer the consequences if we could not stabilize the company. I took the stage precisely on time, flanked by Vincent and the remaining executive team. The room fell silent as I approached the microphone. "Good morning." I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. "Thank you all for being here today. I know there have been many questions about the recent changes in leadership, and you deserve honest answers." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined what had happened in broad strokes, carefully avoiding details that could compromise the ongoing legal investigation. I explained that financial irregularities had been discovered, that the board had taken decisive action to protect the company, and that I had been appointed interim CEO to guide TechVista through this transition period. "I want to assure you that your jobs are secure," I emphasized, seeing the relief wash over many faces. "Our company remains financially strong, our client relationships are stable, and our products continue to lead the market. This is a challenging moment, but it is also an opportunity to recommit to the values of integrity and innovation that have always defined TechVista." I opened the floor for questions, addressing each one with transparency and confidence. When an engineer asked about Carlos' whereabouts, I simply stated that he was no longer with the company and that legal proceedings were underway. When concerns about the company reputation were raised, I shared our communications strategy for rebuilding trust with clients and investors. By the end of the assembly, the mood had shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. I could see determination replacing fear in the expressions of team members as they returned to their departments. We had weathered the first major test of this new chapter. The following day brought the confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating. Carlos and his attorney arrived at Sofia office precisely at 9, both dressed in impeccable suits, projecting an image of confident professionals rather than accused conspirators. Carlos barely glanced at me as they were shown into the conference room where Sofia, our forensic accountant, and 2 additional attorneys from her firm waited. I sat at the head of the table, a position that Carlos clearly found irritating based on the tightening of his jaw. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Carlos' attorney began. "My client believes there have been serious misunderstandings that have led to these unfortunate accusations. We have documentation that provides context for the transactions in question." He slid a folder across the table. Sofia intercepted it, reviewing the contents briefly before passing it to me. Inside were elaborately constructed explanations for each suspicious transaction, presenting them as legitimate business expenses related to the Latin American expansion. "These are creative interpretations," I commented, closing the folder. "Unfortunately, they contradict the recorded conversations we have between your client and Miguel Fuentes, in which they explicitly discuss moving assets to avoid detection and leaving the company, as I believe the exact phrase was, a worthless shell." Carlos leaned forward, abandoning his composed facade. "Those recordings were taken out of context. This is corporate espionage, not to mention an invasion of privacy." "The recordings were legally obtained," Sofia countered. And the context seems quite clear, especially when combined with the forged documents bearing Eden's signature and the falsified board approvals. For 2 hours, the meeting continued in this vein, with Carlos and his attorney attempting various strategies to explain away the evidence against him. As their arguments grew increasingly desperate, I observed Carlos with a strange sense of detachment. This man who had once been the center of my world now seemed like a stranger, his familiar features animated by an ambition and deceit I had been blind to for years. Finally, Carlos' attorney requested a brief private consultation with his client. When they returned, their approach had shifted dramatically. My client is willing to consider a settlement agreement, the attorney proposed. He would relinquish all claims to Tech Vista in exchange for a financial package and mutual non-disclosure agreements. Sophia and I exchanged glances. We had anticipated this pivot and were prepared. "We are not interested in a settlement at this time," Sophia responded. "The board has authorized full cooperation with law enforcement regarding the attempted fraud, money laundering, and identity theft aspects of this case. Those investigations will proceed regardless of any civil agreements." Carlos' face darkened with anger. "You are making a mistake, Eden. You cannot run Tech Vista without me. The investors trust me, not you. The clients came because of my relationships. It was the first time he had addressed me directly, and I met his gaze without flinching. That may have been true once, Carlos, but things change. The board has full confidence in my leadership. Our major clients have all confirmed they will continue working with us. And the investors, they prefer a CEO who does not embezzle company funds." "This is not over," he threatened, standing abruptly. "You have no idea what you are up against." I remained seated, maintaining the calm demeanor that had become my armor. "Actually, I do. I am up against a man who underestimated his wife so completely that he did not even know she spoke Spanish. A man who thought she would meekly board a plane while he stole everything she had worked for. That is not a particularly intimidating opponent." Carlos stormed out, his attorney hurrying after him with mumbled apologies. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled, slowly releasing the tension I had been holding throughout the confrontation. "You handled that perfectly," Sophia said, squeezing my shoulder. "He came expecting to intimidate you, and you completely flipped the script." The weeks that followed brought a cascade of legal proceedings. Criminal charges were filed against Carlos and Miguel for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Gabriela was charged as an accessory. Civil lawsuits were initiated to recover the misappropriated funds. Immigration authorities became involved due to the international nature of the scheme. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding Tech Vista. I implemented new financial controls to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future. I met personally with our largest clients to restore their confidence. End of Libre. I worked with the board to develop a strategic plan that would guide the company forward under my leadership. 3 months after the confrontation, the board voted to remove interim from my CEO title, officially recognizing my role in saving the company and my vision for its future. We held a small celebration in the office, nothing like the lavish parties of the Carlos era, but meaningful in its authenticity. As I raised a glass to toast our team, I caught sight of my reflection in the window overlooking the San Francisco skyline. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, stronger, more confident, unburdened by the need for anyone else's approval. In trying to destroy me, Carlos had inadvertently forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I possessed. The final confrontation came 6 months after that fateful night when I overheard the Spanish conversation that changed everything. Carlos had agreed to a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, and I attended his sentencing hearing, needing to witness this last chapter of our shared story. He looked diminished in his standard-issue jumpsuit, the charismatic entrepreneur reduced to a convicted felon. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, he turned to where I sat in the gallery. "I underestimated you," he said simply. "That was my greatest mistake." The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison for his crimes. As Carlos was led away, our eyes met one final time. There was no love remaining, no hint of the connection we had once shared. But there was something like respect in his gaze, a reluctant acknowledgement of the adversary who had bested him at his own game. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with questions about the case and its impact on Tech Vista. I answered briefly, emphasizing that the company had emerged stronger and more transparent. "Any message for your ex-husband?" one reporter called out as I was leaving. I paused, considering the question. "Just this, gracias por las lecciones." Thank you for the lessons. Walking away from the courthouse, I felt the final weight of the past lifting from my shoulders. Carlos was facing the consequences of his actions. Tech Vista was thriving under my leadership, and I was finally completely free of the man who had taught me the most painful and valuable lessons of my life. 1 year has passed since the day I walked out of that courthouse, leaving behind the final chapter of my marriage to Carlos. Tech Vista has not merely survived the scandal, but flourished under my leadership and the reconstructed executive team. Our valuation has increased to $70 million. We have opened offices in Toronto and London, and our client list includes some of the most prestigious companies in the world. The path to this success was far from smooth. The immediate aftermath of Carlos' arrest brought intense media scrutiny, with business publications dissecting every aspect of the scandal. Competitors attempted to poach our clients during the uncertainty, and some investors initially questioned whether the company could recover from such a public betrayal at the highest level. Those first months required every ounce of determination I possessed. There were nights I returned to my empty home after 16-hour workdays, too exhausted to even eat, wondering if the effort to rebuild was worth it. The emotional toll was equally challenging, moments where grief would ambush me in the middle of a meeting, forcing me to excuse myself to regain composure in the privacy of my office. The divorce proceedings were mercifully straightforward, given Carlos' incarceration and the overwhelming evidence of his criminal activities. The court had no difficulty determining that his actions constituted the ultimate breach of fiduciary duty in a marriage. I retained our home and all my shares in Tech Vista, though the property now felt too large and too filled with memories for comfort. 6 months after the sentencing, I sold the Pacific Heights house and purchased a smaller but bright apartment overlooking the bay. The process of downsizing was unexpectedly therapeutic, allowing me to consciously choose which parts of my past to carry forward and which to leave behind. Each item I discarded from our shared life felt like releasing another strand of the web that had entangled me. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. I worked with a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma, gradually unpacking the complex emotions that accompanied such a profound deception. There was anger, certainly immense clarifying anger that sometimes woke me in the night. There was grief for the future I had planned, and the love I had believed was real. There was shame at not having recognized the signs earlier, though my therapist helped me understand that shame was misplaced. Most surprisingly, there eventually came forgiveness, not for Carlos' sake, but for my own. Holding on to hatred required energy I needed for rebuilding my life and company. I came to see that forgiving him did not mean excusing his actions or denying their impact. It meant refusing to allow his betrayal to define my future or consume my spirit. My relationships with others deepened in unexpected ways through this experience. Sophia, Vincent, and Lisa formed a support network that never wavered, even during my darkest moments. Our shared battle against Carlos' scheme created bonds that transcended ordinary friendship, forging connections based on absolute trust and mutual respect. I also discovered a passion for helping other women who had experienced similar betrayals. 6 months ago, I established the Financial Empowerment Foundation, providing resources and legal assistance to women whose partners had used financial manipulation as a form of control or abuse. The foundation has already helped 27 women reclaim their financial independence and rebuild their lives. My personal life has slowly blossomed again, though not in ways I would have anticipated. I began dating John, a literature professor I met at a charity event 8 months ago. Our relationship progresses cautiously with an honesty and transparency that feels both foreign and essential after my experience with Carlos. John understands my hesitation to fully trust again and respects the boundaries I have established as we get to know each other. The most profound change, however, has been internal. The woman who once derived her sense of value partly from her successful marriage has been replaced by someone who recognizes her intrinsic worth. I no longer need external validation to feel complete or capable. The crucible of betrayal burned away that dependency, leaving behind a core of self-reliance I never knew existed. Tech Vista itself has undergone a transformation that mirrors my personal journey. We implemented unprecedented levels of financial transparency with regular independent audits and clear reporting structures. Our corporate culture emphasizes ethical business practices above all else, with whistleblower protections and open communication channels at every level of the organization. Carlos himself remains in federal prison serving his 8-year sentence. I received one letter from him about 6 months ago, full of justifications thinly disguised as apologies. I did not respond. Some chapters are better left closed, some conversations not worth having. His perspective no longer matters to me. Last week, I was invited to speak at the Women in Technology Summit, sharing my experience of rebuilding a company after betrayal. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces turned toward mine with interest and respect, I felt a sense of completion. The story that had once threatened to destroy me had become a source of wisdom I could share with others. The greatest lesson I learned, I told the audience, was not about business strategy or financial safeguards, though those are certainly important. The most valuable insight was discovering that our worst moments can reveal our greatest strengths. When everything I thought I knew collapsed around me, I found capabilities within myself I never knew existed. I shared how the experience had taught me to trust my instincts, to value transparency in all relationships, and to recognize that true security comes not from depending on others, but from knowing you can survive, even if that dependence is betrayed. Carlos thought he was taking everything from me, I concluded. Instead, he inadvertently gave me the opportunity to discover who I truly am without him. That knowledge is something no one can ever take away. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying but more meaningful was the line of women who approached afterward, sharing their own stories of resilience and rebirth after betrayal. In connecting with them, I realized that my experience, though painful, had given me a language to articulate universal truths about recovery and renewal. As I look toward the future, both personally and professionally, I no longer fear the unknown. I have weathered the worst storm of my life and emerged not just intact but stronger and wiser. The betrayal that could have defined me has instead become merely one chapter in a much longer story, one that I continue to write on my own terms. The Spanish conversation I overheard that night set in motion events that completely transformed my life. Though I would never have chosen this path of pain and rebuilding, I cannot deny that it led me to a place of greater authenticity and self-knowledge than I might otherwise have found. Perhaps that is the ultimate irony of Carlos' betrayal. In attempting to render me powerless, he catalyzed my discovery of a strength I never knew I possessed. In trying to leave me with nothing, he inadvertently gave me the freedom to rebuild everything on a stronger foundation. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately made you stronger? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more tales of resilience and transformation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our worst nightmares. Until next time, this is Eden signing off and wishing you the strength to overcome whatever challenges life puts in your path.